First of all, how much I appreciate and love Wesley Simons. We do work very closely together in the school and in that whole area, and that's one of the reasons we have the unity and the peace and harmony, is brethren willing to work together. Love him dearly, and he's been a great encourager of me, and I appreciate that so much. I was thinking, in regards to this year's lectureship, great questions. Someone might say, as we go over some of these questions, well, these are questions we've been hearing for years and years and years. But we're not going to pass over any of them, and let me tell you why. We have a radio program in our area, Rise to Truth, and we have people who will call in the same question. I guess I've been there associated with it 8 years. We've heard some of the same ones for 8 years. But we never know who may be new in the area, who's never heard this before. And it's an opportunity to either teach truth that someone has not heard or to reinforce it. So, many of these questions are of that very nature. We've heard them discussed before, but there may be someone that's really struggling, and we hope that we might be able to help them. So it's to that end that we will begin. First question is it right to sing during communion? I try to be a man of few words. No, it's not right. Now here's the reason. First of all, we recognize that the New Testament is our pattern. It gives us authority. Friends, there is absolutely no verse. There is not even an intimation of a verse that would allow us to do such. And so if there's no authority, why would we entertain it? Now there may be any number of other reasons as to why. But if we're going to follow the Bible and let the Bible be our pattern, and if there's no authority for such, then we need to stay away from it. But there's something in addition to that I think that we ought to consider, and that is this. Not only do we not have any Bible pattern or authority for that, but if one could sing during the Lord's Supper, what about whistling during the preaching? Now, I've heard many people do many things, but we know how distracted that is. You can't have your mind engaged in two different directions at the same time. And so, friends, I would just simply say, if the Bible doesn't authorize it, leave it alone, because there's just absolutely no authority for such. All right. Number 2. Why is it that Nashville seems to be such a hotbed for liberal activity? With Woodmont Hills, Otter Creek, and Zoe Group, Lipscomb College, and many others that slide under the radar, one would almost think there's something in the water up there.
That was from the internet.
Yes, this was from the internet, and whoever submitted this may have some insight to that. There may be something in the water there. But I'll say this. I learned a long time ago, I will not begin to answer for what some of my brethren do. And it's not a geographical location. It's not just Nashville. If there's anyone anywhere that is not governed by the principles of truth, then we should not be in endorsement of that, regardless of who or where it may be. So first and foremost, we need to recognize that. Now, let me just emphasize something. I think the key here is really trying to show us influence. Influence. The influence of some of our modern colleges. Brother Choate, J.E. Choate, has written a great number of articles for religious journals and papers, and I never will forget a statement that he's made, that one of the greatest things that we could do is divorce ourselves from our schools and start over again. I believe Brother Choate has something there. Friends, if you'll notice, and I remember back, it was in the maybe mid-90s, right here at Bellview, there was a lectureship that dealt with the influences, and I remember being a part of that, and mine was about lectureships and how it is that we are influenced through these schools and universities. They certainly have a tremendous influence. But I want you to observe some things, that when they do not believe the truth, when they do not love the truth, when they do not practice the truth, what can we expect them to teach our young people? And when they come back to our congregations from which they come, what can we expect them to bring with them but what they've been taught? This is where much of that influence has come. Now again, it's not geographical, because this is a problem that is all over. Now, why is it that they are doing that? I don't know, other than they do not love things as they should. If one loves the Lord, he's going to do the Lord's will, whatever it is. And that calls for sacrifice. There's many things that I've had to change in my own life when I read and understood that this is what the Lord desired of me. And so we have to rear our young people. We have to instill within others the desire to do the will of God. Now, I know that this may be remotely related, but I think of such passages as 2 Corinthians 8, verses 11 and 12. If there first be a willing mind. Now, they've already demonstrated, those that have been identified here, that they do not have a willing mind to truth, to right. And so we've got to do a better job of instilling that in those as they will be influenced by it. Some of these I've not heard of the Zoe group. I'm not sure maybe what all is involved there. But friends, it doesn't matter what the name, what the association may be. If it's not governed by the truth of God, then we're not going to have a part of it. But realize that they will influence. They'll find ways in which they will impart that particular teaching. Now, there may be some other things, and maybe we need to stop here and open it up and allow some of the smarter ones to say something.
I want to ask Jerry Brewer to mention something about the situation with OCC, or OCU now. I know he's been fighting that battle in relationship to some of the things that have been going on there. I know it's not in Nashville, but it also shows that it's all over the place.
It is. That's not something, we all know that. That's not something that's confined to where we live. It's everywhere. And Oklahoma Christian University is, it's not Christian, of course. And what part of the faith they held to, they left long ago. Back in November of last year, there was a group of Oklahoma preachers who got together to object to the people that they had on their lectureship. Sean Smith, who is their vice president for church relations. Now, let me tell you all something about church relations. With a school, I used to work for Oklahoma City University, the real OCU, which is a Methodist school. And they had a vice president for church relations, and his responsibility was to raise money among the churches, Methodist churches in Oklahoma. That's exactly what these people want to do with the churches, or with the colleges that our brethren support. The point that I made at a meeting in February on the campus there, which I'm sure went in one of their ears and out the other, was that the church and the school, or the school, is not an adjunct of the church. It is no part of the church. They said in these Oklahoma Christian officials, Lynn McMillan, Dean of their Bible College, Sean Smith, Vice President for Church Relations, and Mike O'Neill, their President, who came from Pepperdine, so that ought to tell you something. They have all said that the school wants to be a servant of the church. The school does not serve the church. The school serves the home. It is an adjunct of the home. And the big problem among our brethren, and I hear this even among some sound brethren, is that we talk about our schools. These are not church schools. These are private institutions that are operated and were established by our brethren. Bill Craig told me, and he got it from somebody else, I don't remember who, and some of you may know, that someone once said that a school ought to die with its founder. And that's exactly what ought to happen. But Oklahoma Christian is gone. They have, they're just as gone as Abilene. If you know anything about Pemberton, this fellow who's teaching that the Old Testament wasn't really written by who it claims to be written by, and so forth. If you read anything about that in Contending for the Faith or any of the other terms, you know what I mean. But this is not confined. It's not confined to Nashville, although it is in Nashville. It's in Abilene. It's everywhere.
Let me just add one thing further. Not only is it Nashville and in Oklahoma, it is all around us. And it can happen where we are if we don't guard the truth. Whenever you depart from the truth, this is what will come in with the floodgates.
And it doesn't take long. About how long would you say it would take for a congregation or a school or anything along that line to depart from the faith?
I don't have an exact date or time, but I know it doesn't take very long. We can see within a congregation that a change within a preacher, a change within an eldership, and immediately things have already been laid that will make those changes. So it's not a great time factor, though some may choose. You see, here's what's been taught, and I remember well in some of the graduate courses that I had, how you introduce change. That we do it, and I believe somebody mentioned, maybe David had mentioned this, that we kind of weave. They introduce a little bit of it, and then you back off. I heard an old brother express it like this. He said it was back years ago when we used to grind an axe. He said you'd bear down on it, and that metal would get red hot. What happens if you didn't back off? You got white, you'd take the temper out of it. It was a useless piece of steel. So they back off, come back to it again. And they have gotten so bold now that they believe they can bear down on this for longer periods of time. But it has always been there and will be. But we've got to deal with it.
Roy Hardesty from Waldron, Arkansas. I was on the campus of OCC, I believe this was like 1990 or 89, and Randy Finter from San Antonio spoke, and after his speech, why the MC got up and he was all flustered and said, well, we'll have to think about that. Well, the next day, the entire Bible department there at OCC was on the stage, and they publicly stated that the things that were said the night before, we do not support. But brethren, that was a long time ago. And the insulting thing about this is the fact that they come and they try to tell us. They had a meeting there in Oklahoma, about 50 or so preachers from southwest Oklahoma, and they tried to tell them that we haven't changed. We're like we used to be, or like we've always been. And brethren, I said that this morning, it's a lie. They're not standing where they stood years ago. And we should not support them.
Amen.
While he's finding it, I'll make a comment. If somebody has listened to that tape by, is it Pemberton? You will be shocked if you have not heard it. Because he blatantly denies the inspiration of the Bible. It is as blatant a thing as I think I've heard. And then they defended it as, well, you have to understand the context. Well, there's no context that you could give that would be permissible for such nonsense as what he was teaching. That's a sad thing.
Willard Wilson from Crestview, Florida. Back on about singing and taking the Lord's Supper, I think the Bible is pretty clear about it. Whenever Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper and they had taken it and finished it, then Matthew 26:30 said, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. That was after they finished partaking of the Lord's Supper. And also in Mark 14:26, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. So they wasn't singing when they were taking the Lord's Supper.
Point well taken. The Lord's Supper was introduced, when that was completed, they sung a hymn. Thank you.
Gary Summers from Winter Park, Florida. On the Lord's Supper, 1 Corinthians 11:28 says, "Let a man examine himself, and so let him eat." I've always had trouble trying to figure out how I'm going to sing and examine myself at the same time. It's a conflict of interest. But you mentioned on the other issue, postmodernism and graduate work. I think that a lot of what is going on is coming from higher education in this country. And Lee Davis has a thing in the book that he didn't get to say when he was speaking about the conversation he had with Rubel Shelley at the Los Angeles airport, and pointing out how that once they were in agreement, but now they're not in agreement. Rubel said, "Yes, Lee, we may differ about these things, but it really just does not matter." And that's what postmodernism is. We can all have our own views and we can all be right. And I think that's probably infiltrated in a lot of our colleges, following the lead of the secular schools.
Okay. And the point that Brother Brewer brought up is very, very important. And that is, they don't feel accountable or responsible to anyone. They can make any kind of statement. And that is sad, sad indeed. Anything else? Well, let's move on then. This is another question that comes from the internet. And it says, first, are we, that is Christian parents, elders, preachers, etc., losing the battle? Second, what can parents, elders, and preachers do to counteract the hideous philosophy of subjective truth? It permeates from our religious neighbors, teachers in secular and Christian schools, the songs that we listen to, and the television shows that we are watching. There are at least two questions noted within this, but one, I don't believe we're losing the battle. But in considering this, I recognize that it is a battle that the home has to engage and fight. That's where it begins. Now, when the home doesn't accomplish what God gave the home to do, then of course there's going to be a void. And there may be the reason why others have been established for that. But we need, and I believe really strongly about these things, we need to teach the nature of truth. Truth is not truth because I say it's truth, but it comes from the very nature of God. We've got to understand that. And truth will never go out of style. It's always true, if it's true. And these principles need to be taught in the home. We need to live the truth. Now that may seem rather simplistic, but I don't know how else to say it. Where your heart is, where we love, that's where our heart is going to be. We need to obey, demonstrate these things. No doubt that many are coming out of the home without a proper demonstration of this because they don't see mom and daddy that believe the truth, that love the truth. And friends, let me give you a personal illustration that really struck home to me. As I was doing some graduate work, I was writing on ethics. And I proposed a study, and I tested a great number of people. many of them members of the church. And the question that I raised was this: is it ever right for a Christian to lie? And you would be amazed. People say that God's truth and that ethics are absolute, and then they would deny it because they found an exception for which they could lie and it would be acceptable. And that's the standard that we're dealing with. There are many people that they just don't understand. They don't grasp that idea. So we cannot afford to give up these things. Not only are we to teach the nature of truth, love the truth, obey the truth, but now here's the clincher: how about living the truth? How many times have we heard someone say, "Don't do as I do as I say"? And there wasn't the example. Now, our homes are under attack. There's no denying that. The fundamentals are being undermined, and this even as has been mentioned in some of our so-called Christian colleges, that these things are being attacked. But we've got to go back, regardless of who or how many, we've got to make sure we're doing what's right. I can't answer for the world, but I'll tell you one thing: I'm going to answer for my own household. Amen. And I've got to do what's right. I can't sacrifice. I can't discharge that to someone else. And we've got to recognize that. Now, secondly, with this, what can parents, elders, preachers do to counteract the hideous philosophy of subjective truth? It permeates from our neighbors, secular and Christian schools, songs, television, different things that we read and that we're watching. That's right. Whatever happened to parental control? When we told our children that show's not appropriate, they didn't watch it. And you know what? We believe that God gave us the authority to see that that's what it was. No, it's not. I believe David, some others have mentioned this. It's not unloving and unkind. Actually, children are looking for structure. They want those guidelines. But we've got to determine, are we going to be faithful to God, or are we going to be a friend to someone and allow their soul to be lost? This is a grave concern. What can we do? There's plenty to be done. First of all, we can resolve in our own hearts and minds, just as the Scriptures teach. Fathers, provoke not your children unto wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. That's where it begins, in the home. And when we begin preaching and teaching, I say begin, when we restore that aspect in the home, we strengthen the home, then we're going to see this as it affects all other aspects of society. Okay?
Eddie Whitten from Green Valley, Arizona. I'm disturbed by the question, are we losing the battle? Let's never allow that attitude to take over our thinking. We're going through a cycle that has been from the very beginning of time where God's people would be faithful for a time, then they would apostatize, then they would be subjected to their enemies until the time came that they realized their lost condition and helpless condition, and then pray to God for a deliverer, and He would send a deliverer to bring them back. That's been a cycle that has been in history from the very beginning. The book of Judges is a good illustration of that. We are in a replication, if you will, of the departure of the 19th century, resulting in the division of the church and the Christian church in 1906, almost 100 years to the day. And in that apostasy, we lost our universities, our churches, big churches. We lost many of our members to the liberal element, the Christian church, but there was always a remnant. And that remnant got busy and they worked. And the church began to grow again in the 30s and 40s. And at one time it was the fastest growing religious organization in the United States. We're in that cycle again, and probably at perhaps the low point of that cycle. And these lectureships like this and many others have been a tremendous force in stopping that slide into apostasy. And as we go about these lectureships across the country, we see a new generation of young preachers coming up that gives me so much encouragement that yes, there is a generation coming that is going to hold the line and preach the truth and bring the church back to its faithfulness as it once enjoyed it. It does place upon us a heavy responsibility, and that is the worse the conditions may develop, the harder we need to work, and the more faithful we need to be, and the more active we need to go about encouraging and undergirding the faith of those with whom we have to do. And we can do that only through the Bible, as it's been so well pointed out by you and others during this lectureship. But let's not lose heart. We have before us a great challenge, but it's in times like this that the church grows stronger.
That's exactly right. And you know, when you really look at this, I'm afraid sometimes that people have an erroneous idea that what the church can do for them. You remember the article that surfaced, and I know it was in a number of bulletins, is the church losing her young people? The church never had the young people. The home did, but not the church. And there is a failure in the home many times. But as Eddie has correctly pointed out, in losing the battle, how do you measure when a family is struggling, and it may seem to some that they're losing the battle, but how that they've turned that thing around? And that it's an individual thing, and that's where the emphasis needs to be placed.
Wesley Simons, Elizabethton, Tennessee. I want to comment on the nature of truth about the Bible. When I was a young man growing up on Signal Mountain, Tennessee, I was reared in the Church of God of Prophecy. And I had a Bible by my bed, but I never read it. And one reason I never read it is because they taught me when I went to services that I could read it and allow it to say one thing to me. You could read it, allow it to say something else to you. Another fellow could read it, allow it to say something else to him. Who wants to read a book like that? It has no meaning. Then one day I ran into an early member of the church who taught me something that's the most valuable lesson I've ever learned in my life. Whatever God is trying to say to one man, He's trying to say to everyone. And when I learned that principle, that God is saying the same thing to all men, for the first time in my life, the Bible took on meaning. If one has the attitude, well, you let that verse say anything to you. You know, it says anything to this fellow over here. It has no meaning. Truth is absolute. Truth is attainable. We can know it whether people want us to know it or not. We often have people call our radio program and make statements like this. Well, part of the Bible is inspired and part of it's not. Then I tell the listening audience, get his name and his address. You're going to need it, get his phone number for sure. Because when you read the Bible, you have to call him and find out what part's inspired and what part is not inspired. And so it is with some of these people like the names that we've brought up here today, when they deny the authorship of various inspired men, they're denying the Word of God. We need to warn everyone about these people and show the beauty of the inspired Word of God and let the world know that truth is absolute, it's attainable.
Absolutely. Brethren, may I call your attention to a passage of Scripture in Deuteronomy 6. Very important. Beginning with verse number 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. Now watch carefully. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. We've gotten away from that, haven't we? When we go back, when the Lord and His truth means to us as it was to mean to them, we'll teach those, we'll impart them, and they will be governed by that. All right. Well, let's move on to a third question, and I'm sure this will stir some, the dandruff at least of some. This again is from the internet, Matthew 19:3. I don't guess there's ever been a film conducted that hasn't had to deal with marriage, divorce, and remarriage to some extent. But brethren, let me tell you something. There are some of the most ludicrous, silly questions that are being posed out there that need to be answered. So this is based on Matthew 19:3, and we'll read it in just a moment. Where the Jewish Pharisees asked the Jewish Messiah the question, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Was these Pharisees referring to the New Testament law? Was it the Old Testament law? Or was it the civil law? Since Hebrews 9:17 teaches that a testament is of force after men are dead, otherwise it is of no strength at all while the testator liveth, did the words of Jesus in Matthew 19:9, at the time He spoke them, have any New Testament strength at all, since He spoke them before His death and while the Old Testament was still in force? If so, or if not, why not? Now, let's go back to Matthew 19 for just a moment. And let's notice the principle that is stated here, because this is a great question, and you might recognize this as something that has troubled a great number. We've had one from out in the Denton, Texas area that has written a great deal about it. I think he's debated about everybody imaginable, and still does not grasp the truth. And I say that kindly. But friends, I grew up, as Wesley pointed out, if you can read it in the Bible, you can understand it. And I'll never forget this. My dad had an 8th grade education, and I remember him quoting the Scriptures and telling us and instilling in us principles from that 8th grade education. I don't buy for a moment that you've got to be a highbrow thinker, or you've got to have so many letters and degrees after your name in order to understand truth. In fact, I posed that very question to Wilbur Shelley when he came out after his infamous Somerville speech, and asked him about some things, and he said this. He said, well, Brother Miller, where did you get your Ph.D.? He just finished Vanderbilt. I said, Brother Shelley, if you mean to imply to me that only Ph.D.s can understand the Bible, I said, you're further down than I thought. And I still believe that. Truth is well within our apprehension. Notice verse 3. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Now the background to this question deals with, is the gospel records part of the New Testament? Are they part of the Old Testament? Are they civil law? Just what are they? Well, let me just pose 2 or 3 questions. Let's assume for a moment, and I don't believe this, but for sake of argument, let's assume that they're part of the old law. Here at the conclusion of that lost system, God has 4 books that He causes to be written. Upon whom do these books apply? That needs to be dealt with. And that question certainly, we can see that it's not part of the Old Testament. Now remember, when Jesus was speaking these things and caused these things to be written, these of course was told and they would be written down, and we understand that there would be a time when they would actually become a force. It's just like we might write a will today. And it may be stated that we're going to divide things. Well, when is that will given? It's given today. When will it apply? And I think we can see the same as it relates to the teaching. Now I want you to notice some things. Michael very correctly pointed out that this doctrine denies that Christ will have any judgment of the world whatsoever. Listen, friends, to the number of passages where God begs to differ with that. Acts 17 and verse 31, wherein He hath appointed a time that He shall judge what? We don't judge the world, but the Lord will. Acts 17:31. How about John 2, verses 15 through 17? The world passeth away, and the lust and the things associated with it. The Lord's going to be in judgment, dealing with that. He's going to determine that. That's part of what God's going to discharge to Him. Matthew 16, verses 18 and 19. Watch carefully. Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee, speaking of Peter, the keys of the kingdom of God. Now watch carefully. Whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall have already been bound in heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall have already been loosed. They were only binding and loosing that which God had already bound and loosed. In further recognition of this, how about Matthew 18? Or how about John 3, verses 3 through 5? The new birth. Well, of course, we understand that all of these passages have reference to the fact that this is part of the New Testament. I'd like also for us to think about 2 Thessalonians 1, 7 through 9. Rest with us when the Lord Jesus shall be revealed from heaven, in flaming fire, taking vengeance upon them that know not God and obey not the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's the world. And so, certainly, Matthew is part of the New Testament. It is part of that new covenant, and it is binding upon the covenant people. Now, let's look at perhaps just a couple of things, and then we'll deal with some other things as others may want to continue part of this. When he deals with this fact that Hebrews 9:17 teaches that a testament's only a force after men are dead, when that New Testament system, and bear in mind that when this was written and how all of this came about, if that's the case, then what about the Sermon on the Mount? Does the Sermon on the Mount teach some basic principles? Was that not a force during that time frame as well? I don't know of one that would assume that the Sermon on the Mount did not have its value then. But if you subscribe to this view, you would have to throw all of those principles out. Okay, well, there's some other things that could be said, but our time is just about gone, and I know that there are those that want to say some things about this, so.
Has to be very brief.
I want to make one argument on the, what does Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John fit? And you made the argument, I want to build it a little bit further. And that is to say that they're part of the Old Testament is to say the Godhead's stupid. And I say that kindly. Because the Old Testament was nailed to Calvary's cross. We all know that, the Bible says that. Then to say that in the 40s and the 50s AD, the Godhead decided to write Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and said, oh, by the way, let's add that to the Old Testament, which has already been abolished. That is ridiculous, to say the least.
Amen. I believe they said this will have to be the last observation.
Gary Summers, Winter Park. The first verse of Mark says, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The beginning of the gospel. Not later, it began then. And even though Jesus lived and died under Old Testament law, he was teaching the principles of the gospel of the kingdom.
Excellent point. I trust that our study together has been profitable. There have been many that could have done a much better job than I, but I appreciate the opportunity, and may we always consider the value of questions, because you never know when someone may be teetering on the fence of liberalism, and if we can help stay and help bring them back, they'll all have been worthwhile. Thank you.
Brother Colley is a native Texas.